Hello, set winners. In this presentation, we are going to talk about the narrative passages. Now, there are a few important things to understand about the SAT test. SAT is a standardized test, which means the structure of the test is going to remain the same. So, irrespective of the test you go for, test 6, test 7, test 8, provided by College Board, or if you go for the real test that you would appear on, like 27th of August is the next test, the structure of the test is not going to change. The passages may change, the content may change, but the way the questions are asked and the way the passages are structured or the whole test is structured is not going to change. First passage in the reading section would always be a narrative passage. Now, what exactly is a narrative passage? A narrative passage is like a personal story, something which happened in someone's life, right? So it's like an incident, an important incident from a person's life. It could be from a narrative story, or it could be a person telling his own story. It could be from a book, or it could be a person relating his story from his maybe biography. So that's the nature of the passage. It is about an incident which happened in a person's life, and he tries to present it in an animated and in a creative fashion. So that's what this passage is all about. There is one main character, and then there are associated other characters in the passage. So you are supposed to identify who is the main character and who are the subordinate characters or supporting characters in the whole story, right? The second thing is the story itself. So what kind of transitions are there? There might be an initial introduction or an introduction to the setup or the context of the story. Say, for example, it happened in a hotel, so it could be about a hotel. Yeah, if it's a story of a kid, let's say, for example, where he tells about his journey of getting into reading, how he liked reading, or it could be about how a person persuaded someone else to get a motorbike. We'll see these stories and these passages in a while, but the crux of the matter is a narrative passage is a very different passage from a science or a history or a social science passage. It talks about what happened in a person's life. So having this mindset, reading the passage, narrative passage with this kind of mindset is very important. You cannot be looking for facts and figures while doing a narrative passage. There won't be any table, there won't be any questions which ask you to analyze content or which ask you to draw a connection between cause and effect. It's like understanding people's emotions and how people behave in their day-to-day lives. So how should you approach this passage? The way you should approach is that you should consider it like a story, like a small story. You should read the whole passage first, and then you should do questions with regard to the passage. Mostly the questions are in sequence, but there might be some questions which break the sequence, and you might get questions related to the later paragraphs in the initial section. So let's have a quick look at the SAT test paper and how a narrative passage looks like. So this is SAT test 6, and from here you see that the first passage, if you read this particular passage, it's about a person who has got 12 daughters and he has a family to support. The whole story talks about how he built the context to get a bike from his boss. So this guy by the name Nawabuddin has 12 daughters, and he tries to do many things to earn money, but eventually he joins a big landlord by the name Harani, and he takes care of Harani. So it is described how he used to sincerely work for this guy called as Harani, and eventually he tells Harani that, see, I've been working so hard, why don't you give me a bike? Harani doesn't care much because he's all bothered about his own comfort. So he says, okay, fine, go ahead, have a bike. And he actually gives him a bike because it doesn't matter whether he spends some money or not. The point is, he wanted himself to be in a very comfortable zone. So that's what this passage is all about. It's about the story of how this guy by the name Nawabuddin managed to get a bike from Harani. So, all this passage, when you read it, you'll find that there are lots of small scenarios here and there how he builds the whole story, and how he comes to the point where he asks Nawabuddin to give him a bite. And you have to read it with this background in your mind, or with this clear understanding of the structure of a narrative passage, that it's just a story how incidences happen in our day-to-day lives. It's not science, it's not fact, it's about emotions and how people relate with each other. So that's important. And the questions are also around the same thing. You have to understand the interplay between different characters, how they relate with each other, and how they interact with each other. What is the story? What transpires between the characters is more important than anything else. So you have to read it like a small story and answer questions accordingly. Let's take one more example. This is from test 7. So here there is a story about how a man adopted a small girl. He adopted this girl and started taking care of her. This girl was taken care of like a father takes care of his daughter. So he adopts a daughter, and how his life changed after the arrival of this girl in his life. Up until so, it is depicted in a very metaphorical manner. Here you'll find that he talks about gold, and he was all weaving gold. Now, weaving gold means he was all about money. His life was more towards earning money, but uh, in his efforts to make money, he actually ignored the rest of life. And how, with the arrival of this girl, the life of this guy changed. He started looking at life from a different perspective. He started looking at relationships, and he started appreciating the value of love and how children take care of the world. He became aware of himself and his surroundings, that there's so much more to life than earning money alone. And then there is a parallel drawn between him and the girl. So this girl, who was a small girl initially, was very curious about everything happening around her. She used to look at leaves and trees and butterflies and everything with a lot of curiosity. But with the passage of time, she became more aware. Her questions changed, and her quests for life also changed. So that's what this passage is all about. Again, as you can see, the two main characters are this guy who adopts the girl and the small girl by the name Epi, and how the interplay of these two characters uh, uh, resulted into the two characters developing different perspectives of life. While the gentleman became more aware of relationships, the small girl became more aware of the world around her and how people act. So, again, as you can see, this is a very, very personal story, how two characters relate with each other. The third passage, as you can see, this is from test 8. And here, this guy is all into books. So, a boy tells about his own story, how he loved reading books, and how his father never liked him to read books. So, what transpired during this passage of him getting into books, and how he got hold of a book by Charles Dickens, and how reading this book of Charles Dickens convinced him that he also should become an author one day. That's about this whole thing. How he developed interest in books. His father never liked him to read books, but then how he took care of his father, and how he still managed to read books and eventually got into uh, reading as many books as he wanted to, and finally decided to become an author. That's the whole story. As you can see, I can relate all these stories in just one line, but if you can look at the whole passage, it's like so many paragraphs. Yeah. So what it means is that the crux of the matter is very short. I mean, the whole story can actually be stated in one or two lines, but there are so many small scenarios, incidences, sentences, and all of them are interlinked with each other. And that's what you should be aware of. What I'm trying to say is this: you should have an eye on the big picture while reading these passages. It's not about individual lines or individual scenarios. It's about what is the message in the whole passage. What exactly is the writer trying to say? As I always say, read the message, don't read the passage. So don't read the whole lot of story, don't get into the thick of the thin things. Try to ask yourself, what is the big picture, and accordingly approach these narrative passages. So basically, whenever you do a narrative passage, what you should do is first read the whole story as if in a single go. Try to read the story. So I'll say read the story, right? Get the big picture, and then answer questions one by one. While answering questions, you are supposed to go back to the passage and look for any evidences to support your answer. And of course, I mean, don't just think that it's about words. It's about the message which the writer is trying to convey. You have to understand the context, and that's how you would be able to answer all these narrative passages. So that's how that's going to be the first passage in your test, the narrative passage. As I told you, the structure of the SAT test is fixed. The first passage is always a narrative passage, and the approach you have to adopt is first read the whole passage as if it's a single piece, a story. Try to don't get into the thick of the thin things. Don't try to understand each and every small thing in the passage. Try to understand the emotions, the interplay between characters, and what is the goal, what is the big picture, what is the author trying to convey to you. There are sometimes passages with some message, yeah, and you have to read to understand what's going on and how the message is conveyed to you. All right, all the best to you. You can do questions with regard to test 6, 7 and 8 as a practice for mastering the narrative section of the test.